Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Catherine, and this is episode 24 of our spring break sprint, where, in case you've missed it, the entire series is linked above, including the intro episode that talks further into what we're doing here. But long story short, I am diving into old F1 lore from before I became an F1 fan midway through the 2021 season, and am helping to educate other Drive to Survive era Formula One fans about the sport. Yesterday, we talked about the 2014 season finale in Abu Dhabi and how it kind of got a little weird and not in a good way. So don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode in this series or all season long. And so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. Now, the United States Grand Prix, as I mentioned 2 episodes ago, I believe it was 2 episodes ago. Yeah, 2 episodes ago in the John Watson episode, which is linked above and down in the show notes, I talked about how the United States has the most different circuits used in F1 races in the same country with 12. And one such race that I actually always keep forgetting about having happened is the United States Grand Prix in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, 25 minutes west of here. Is that direction west? Technically, the direction I am pointing in is west. But anyway, the United States Grand Prix took place in Phoenix from 1989 to 1991. And it was actually a last-minute schedule change going into 1989 because after 1988, the city of Detroit basically refused to invest more money to bring the Detroit street circuit that F1 had driven in since 1982 to the standard of the regulations for Formula One at the time, which if you know about F1 regulations, they're not just specific to the cars, but they are also specific to things like circuits, which is why the Grand Prix track layout of the Phoenix Grand Prix probably would not pass muster for a number of reasons, including like the lack of spectator availability in either the downtown Phoenix of the 1980s and early 90s or the downtown Phoenix of today. I just don't know how they would be able to pull off a street circuit in that type of situation, especially having been, I and my sisters went to a Red Bull show run in downtown Phoenix, basically on the same part of the old track from the late 80s, early 90s. And spectator wise, it's very difficult to cram a lot of people in, which is also part of the issues it's why we don't race in Phoenix anymore, among other things. But Phoenix really wanted an event after Detroit said we're done. And Bernie Ecclestone, who was the boss of F1 at the time, was desperate to keep a foothold for Formula One in the United States and keep a US race on the calendar. Due to the short notice and the time that it took for the Phoenix City Council to approve it, the race was scheduled for June 4th of 1989. You know, June, when it's really hot in Arizona. Like, it's April right now, and I'm sitting here in long sleeves, and I have to turn my air conditioning off, and I'm sitting in front of a bunch of bright lights, and it's 95 degrees outside. So I'm going to get a little warm and sweaty as I'm recording this episode. So I can't imagine driving in 100-degree heat in an F1 car where the track temperature is going to be significantly higher than the air temperature. Like, we already had the Qatar Grand Prix that almost killed half the drivers a few years ago before it had been moved to later in the year where it was slightly cooler in Qatar. But yeah, so it was short notice. It was really hot. There were actually one of the support races ahead of the Grand Prix had a manhole cover issue very similar to the one that broke Carlos Sainz's car at the first Las Vegas Grand Prix during that first practice session in 2023. So it was not a smooth sailing start, and one of the many issues was the track itself and the streets of Phoenix, which if you drive through the streets of Phoenix now, or at least the downtown Phoenix streets, like it's not that great. I was doing that drive last week, and the potholes, lots of potholes. Let's put it from there. So location wise, this was in the heart of downtown Phoenix, with the start finish line was on Jefferson Street and about 5th Avenue. And the east-west boundaries were basically just past 6th Avenue was one of the turns, and to 5th Street on the other side, with the major straights being on Jefferson Street and Washington Street. This is not a complicated track like some of the other purpose-built tracks, or something like Suzuka with lots of turns and kinks and spoon curve and things like that. So it was very straightforward, and therefore not very exciting. Like when I looked at the track layout, which here is the 1989 track layout, which is the layout that they used in 89 and 90, and I will pop up the 91 one when we get to talk about that in a minute. But the 1989 race was originally scheduled for 81 laps, but due to the heat and what led to tire degradation and the fact that the cars were slower, is they knew that they weren't going to make it within that time limit, because Formula One races have an outside time limit that they have to be raced within, and if you get past that time limit, the race just kind of stops dead in its tracks. Basically, they designate a final lap of the race. So there was a push prior to the race to lower it from 81 laps to 70, but Ken Tyrrell of Tyrrell F1 team was the lone holdout that kept the race as scheduled for 81 laps, and it would ultimately be 75. Now, only 31,441 people showed up because it was hot and no one likes driving downtown in downtown Phoenix, or maybe that's just me. But it was not very well spectated, especially if you consider the hundreds of thousands of people in attendance in races today. Alain Prost did win for McLaren, and McLaren is actually the only constructor to win in Phoenix. And Honda is the only engine manufacturer who has also ever won in Phoenix. Prost would end up winning that race by almost 40 seconds over Riccardo Patrese, who was driving for Williams, and American driver Eddie Cheever, who took third while driving for Arrows. There were only 6 finishers in this race, but 9 drivers ended up being classified, including Jonathan Palmer, who drove for Tyrrell, who we talked about in our F1 family members episode, which is linked down in the show notes. But he ran out of fuel on lap 69 and was running in contention for 4th place, and would have actually gotten 4th place had his team boss sign that paper, dropping the race laps down to only 70 instead of 81 / what ultimately ended up being 75. So awkward for them. In 1990, they very wisely moved the United States Grand Prix in Phoenix, Arizona, a place in the desert where it's hot, to March, where it is less terribly warm out, where it's only 89 degrees air temperature. So not even to consider the track temperatures, but they clearly weren't as bad as a 100.9 degree day. Ayrton Senna won that race from P5 on the grid ahead of John Alesi, who was also driving for Tyrrell. And that was actually the first podium of his career, which was another one of those drivers with near misses for the championship. He would never win a championship in his career. And another driver who drove for Williams rented out that podium. Senna would go on to win the 1990 title. And unfortunately, only about 10 to 15,000 people were there to see him win that race in Phoenix. In 1991, they had a new track layout, which was just slightly modified. You can see where compared to the other track layout. And it was another March season opener, but it was only 77 degrees out. So quite a pleasant afternoon, even though it was probably still really hot on track. Ayrton Senna won the race again, 16 seconds ahead of Alain Prost, who had moved over to Ferrari in the meantime, with Nelson Piquet Sr. driving for Benetton in third. And that was the last race we would ever drive in Phoenix. The original contract was for 5 seasons. They got 3, and clearly there were 3 mediocre races, so lucky that they got that at the very least. And this was actually the last United States Grand Prix until 2000 due to poor attendance, which, like I said, I don't know how you would have good attendance in downtown Phoenix trying to have an F1 race, let alone an F1 race to the modern capacity in the 2020s. But what do I know? Anyway, the race would then move back to Indianapolis from 2000 to 2007, including the nightmare race that was the 2005 United States Grand Prix, which we have talked about, and that is linked down below. And the last time F1 race prior in Indianapolis, prior to the resurrection of the Indianapolis Grand Prix in 2000, was when Indy 500 was part of the F1 schedule back in the 1950s. So that was like the kind of the real return of real Formula One in Indianapolis, but they had to wait between 1992 and 2000 to get there. It doesn't surprise me that those races were boring, because the track layout looks terrible. And you know that I have so many opinions on track layouts, like Miami, which is not going to be very good. But anyway, we're going to get through Miami, and then we'll get to the real races of the rest of the season. But we still have a few more episodes of the Spring Break Sprint to get through. Next episode tomorrow, we are going to talk about that time an F1 driver got held hostage. Yep, it happened on race weekend. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode in this series or all season long. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you in the next one.